Hey, and welcome to a new episode of Transformed and Renewed. Listen, if this is your first time or you are returning, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. And again, if you are returning, make sure you also comment on this video. Would like to and love to get your comments and your feedback. And as we get into it, we're going to be discussing to me, a controversial topic, which has always been, I guess, fairly controversial, but I always like to, share topics with you that can impact, your spending as well as your health. So when it comes down to it, are food labels accurate? And I know that different people some may, look at the food labels when you're doing grocery shopping. Sometimes, for other people, they really rely on food labels. And so this question of, are food labels accurate? And I would say that at least when I was doing my undergraduate career, this was actually a topic, or at least a class that I took, and we learned a lot about food labels. And I would probably say this was quite interesting to me because you learn a lot, especially when it comes to different industries, and there's usually going to be a P word that's associated with, excuse me, associated with different industries. And so one of the, or in that P word is pretty much politics, but when it comes down to nutrition labels or food labels, you probably have, well, you obviously do have something in your cabinet or even in your refrigerator, or something that led you to buying a product, and it could have said, hey, this tastes wonderful, it is, made with this flavor. And for some people, you may have thought that it was the real deal, it was made with real beef, but then you look at it closer and it says beef flavor. And so when you really think about that, you wonder, okay, is it really beef, or is it just beef flavoring, or is it imitation beef? And then you look on the back of the label, and then you see that it is artificial flavor. So it says it has beef flavor, and you were thinking that it contains real beef or even some type of broth, but it actually was artificial, fake. So something that was imitating the flavor of beef, but not the real thing. And so, again, for many people, even myself in the past, I have been a victim, and I wouldn't say necessarily a victim, but I have been ignorant when it came to really understanding the food label. So understanding, okay, what is actually listed, and really thinking, how accurate is that? So I had came across an article and trying to look for it, but it was actually by a farm. Yep, just pulled it up, and this was actually a decent read, and I'll show it to you briefly. But that way you can kind of see that this is, to me, I thought it was pretty accurate, or at least pretty helpful, because it's a farm that's giving their take on, are nutrition labels inaccurate? And to me, I thought that this was pretty neat, that, hey, farms can actually tell you their side, or at least what they have experienced. And so, as I'm pulling this up, one thing I will say is that when it comes to the nutrition label, it is not cheap. When you put a product on the market, and sometimes people wonder, you know, why is the food so cheap, or, why is it so expensive? And typically, food is not, I wouldn't say is necessarily cheap. Sometimes it can actually be expensive, even if it is, let's say, $1 or $2. Because when you think about the quality of the food, the company, it could have gotten that product from a third party supplier, and the ingredients could be fairly cheap, or at least the resourcing of the ingredients could be fairly cheap. And so what ends up happening is, obviously, you have a lot of market analysis, especially when it comes to, okay, the product is going to be listed on the shelves, and I have to pay whichever store, a fee in order to have these products sitting on the shelves. And there is also a cost associated with how long the products sit on the shelf. And so when you think about those factors, as well as how many products are you listing on the shelves? And again, that kind of goes into the market analysis and the estimation of how much a company spends. So if you have one location, that's one cost, but then you have multiple locations. So the costs add up. And then you also estimate how many people actually buy that product per day, per week, per month. And so if the costs work out, then you can actually charge a price that to some people they may think is cheap. So a person could see, for example, a gallon of milk at $2, and it could say organic. Uh, Pasture or grass fed cows, and it is sold at $2 flat. Now, for one person, they may think that it's cheap, but the company itself could have say, you know what, it pretty much cost us when we really broke down the numbers, it cost us only 50 cents just to get this milk. And so for every $2 sold, they are pretty much reaping in $1.50. And so to me, that is basically a 300% gain. Okay. So you can imagine when it comes down to the math and as well as how often those milks are sold, they have made their profit back. Now, obviously, again, you do have the costs associated with it, but once you reduce that from the income or the revenue, then if you're left with a plus sign, then that's pretty good. So one thing about the reason why I mentioned that is because costs, at least according to this farm, can cost about $800 to $1,000 per sample, and this is just for labeling. So for the label to be tested and approved, and so again, for a lot of companies, they have to go through this process, but it is a very interesting process because while you pay this amount of money, you would think that okay, if I have to pay such a hefty fine, everything is pretty much going to be accurate. It's pretty much going to be precise. That's not the case. And I can tell you that from my own experience, and you can probably attest to it yourself if you do this exercise that I share with you that you can actually do um, after we go through this slide. So let me show you this real quick, and that way you can actually see this information. So, uh-oh, go back, go back. Let's see. There we go. All right. So let's switch this. Okay. Okay. So, and so again, this is Miller's Bio Farm. I think that's that's the name, Miller's Bio Farm. Okay. I believe they're located in Pennsylvania. Okay. So again, this was just a article that they did about the nutrition label, and here you can see where it says that it can cost about $800 to $1,000 per sample just for testing. And then here it talks about how the FDA allows for up to 20% difference. Okay, so yes, as they said, there is a 20% difference. Just kind of scrolling through the article, you can kind of see that they do kind of break it down, at least in terms of the accuracy of the nutritional label. But kind of going back up to this part, they have different classes of nutrients, all from class one up to classes three. And class one typically involve those micronutrients, so vitamin D, vitamin C, any other uh, minerals, or that would typically be fortified. Um, when a food product is fortified, so it can include micronutrients like the vitamin C and vitamin D, but it can also include fiber and some other products that have been fortified just to add value to that product. Okay. The interesting thing was that at least with the class ones are that you have to at least have 100% or more of the declared value. So if it says 6% of vitamin D, it should not be 5.8% vitamin D. It should be 6% Okay. Um, could it be rounded? Don't know, but I also think that, at least based on the claim that according to this, it seems like it has to be at 6%. Now it could be 6.1. That's pretty much fine, but it has to at least hit that minimum 100%. Now with the class two, these are going to be the vitamins, minerals, protein, etc., that are not fortified. So class one are typically fortified, but then class two can be pretty much just non-fortified. Okay. The thing about this is that the nutrients must be at 80%. So on the label, it could say, hey, you're getting about 20 grams of protein. But in actuality, you could only be getting 18% or 18 grams, excuse me, of protein. So 20 grams, but in actuality, you're getting 18 grams. Or this could say that you could be getting 30 grams, but instead you're getting 27 grams of protein. So could be, small changes, but then it's a big difference. Now, this one, the third, uh, I guess, group of nutrients, these would include calories, sugars, fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium. Now, this can contain 100% or less. The thing about this is that, let's say a food says that it contains about 10 grams, or let's say 5 grams of saturated fat, but it only contains, 2 grams of saturated fat. Especially if you're cooking something and you are looking for a certain texture, you may say, well, that is, falsified information, or, I want to sue just because, obviously that is greater than, yeah, I would say greater than a 50% difference if it's 5 grams, but it's only 2 grams that's listed. Now, obviously, with this, you may say, well, these are typically deemed as not as important. But again, for someone who may be relying on sodium, let's say it could be listed at 500, but it's only 200 milligrams of sodium that's listed. Well, that's again over 50% that is not present in that particular food product. And so when you think that you're increasing your sodium levels, especially if you tend to consume a lot less sodium, which at least with typical diets, it can be pretty challenging to avoid getting a lot of sodium. But if you are on that, or if you do find yourself not getting a lot of sodium, and this ends up being the case where you buy a product and it is significantly lower in the sodium value compared to what is listed, then this could also be a huge, flag. So again, this was again a article that I came across, and I thought it was interesting because haven't seen too many farms give their take, especially when it comes to the nutrition facts label. But this was pretty neat to see that there are different views about it. And one thing I would say is that, especially, again, when it comes to the food labels, they are not accurate. Okay. Even, if it seems very polished, the colors seem pretty cool. The format, the font on the food product can seem pretty, neat and polished. The numbers on the back, to be honest, aren't always accurate. And I would say probably, well, I'm not sure how many of the sections are even accurate. Most of the times it can be rounded up to the nearest number, especially if you see a whole number. Often on a food label, it is likely rounded up because, mm, at least when I've done, testing during my undergraduate, you know, fat analysis, protein analysis, different types of testing. It's usually not going to be a whole number. You usually going to get a decimal, and that's because a machine does not generate a whole number. Whatever you get, in terms of once you put it on the balance, weigh it, go through the testing, it's going to be a raw, dirty number. And what I mean by dirty is it's not going to be a clean number that's rounded to, zero point 0.5 or 1.5 or 2. So it's usually, it could be 2.2, it could be 2.1, 2.18475. Okay. So, again, when it comes down to the nutrition label aspect, a lot of the numbers that you see could be rounded. Now, some could be fairly accurate, but I guess for a large part, it also depends on the integrity of the company. I would also say the integrity of the company matters. I know that there are different companies that could care less about putting the most accurate numbers on the label, or at least putting the real information on the label. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, there is a level of politics, even when it comes to the food industry. Um, Obviously, when there is money to be made or power to be, I guess, obtained, and a certain respect level that is just so enticing, then you can get into a lot of just unethical practices. And unfortunately, a lot of those do not leave the consumer in a good position, especially when it comes to them being able to trust, okay, what am I actually buying? And what I'm buying, is this really, quality ingredients, or is this something that was left over from last week batch, and I'm getting, something left over and it's marked down because they just had to get rid of it. So, again, this is, at least from what I have learned and experienced. And again, they're not saying that all companies have false information, but there is a level of inaccuracy when it comes to what you buy and what you may think you're actually getting. So if you're getting a product that says it's 300 calories and you're trying to be on the low calorie diet, it could, or maybe could contain, um, in some cases, a little bit more than 300. Now, obviously, what the law says, or at least the guidelines, you obviously should go by that. And even, when I'm looking at the guideline, I can't say I agree with everything, because there is so much variation, and the deviation can really cause a product to be very different, very different. So, again, this is just information for you. Hopefully you can apply it, and hopefully it, gets you to, or gets you to think about, whenever you go to the grocery store, how you actually choose foods. And even for myself, sometimes I have to remind myself that most of these are not accurate, but I can also look at the company and really understand, okay, is this a credible company? And as well as comparing that food product with other companies, and being able to have a better idea of, okay, are these values pretty similar? And like I said earlier, when you see values that are like a whole number, typically they have been rounded. So, because otherwise it would make a consumer, most people, kind of hesitate with buying that product. So, hopefully, this information can help you in, making some better and informed decisions. So, if you appreciated this, and again, I know this was fairly brief, it is so much to delve into when it comes to food labels. Again, I had to go through a semester of learning, so you can imagine there are additional topics when it comes to food labels, as well as just politics in the food industry. But hopefully, again, this can give you some insight in terms of what is actually real and what is fake. So, real is going to be, obviously the real food. Could be pineapples, or it is pineapples, or it could also be, a chicken. Okay, that's real food. Something false could be natural flavors. And this is another ingredient that is typically listed on food labels. And even when I did research, there is actually not a true definition. And when I say true, it is not a universal, or at least a definition that can be explained to where a person could say, yep, this is a natural flavor. Because that concept could say, oh, well, you know, chicken, powder is a natural flavor, but in reality, you could have a tire tread and you could extract some tire flavor from that and put it in the food product. Now, a lot of people think, that I'm joking, but to be honest, a lot of food companies could use, wood, and could extract that, use it as a natural flavor. It could just be different chemicals that you make, and they kind of get around again to the politics of how they can name, label, and get around just a lot of laws. So it could be a lot of just misinformation and a lot of um, I guess, misleading when it comes to the food industry. So again, I like to pay attention to that because if I have to spend my money on it, then that means that I'm supporting the ignorance, that I'm engaging in. And so um, that's just something for you to think about. And again, if you enjoyed this segment, make sure that you hit that like, that subscribe button, and also be sure to comment and make sure that you also tune in often as we put up videos and content. Let us know what you think about it because I always want to, provide the best content related to what would like to know, especially when it comes to health. There are different topics, especially that I've seen, experienced myself, and a lot of topics that I have shared even in the past year. It has definitely involved my past experience. So I don't tell you this just as somebody who doesn't know, but I tell you this as someone who has experienced different things, whether it's, dealing with doctors and their misinformation and even just dealing with different health issues and how to overcome different ones, and kind of what you can do going through just different periods of life and knowing how to properly have a good, healthy routine. So, again, hopefully, if this information applied to you or it was helpful to you, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on your screen, and that way you can stay up to date with the latest content. So until next time, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will talk with you